Ancient Egypt religion was not a marginal or symbolic aspect of civilization, but the foundational structure upon which European society, Egyptian society, politics, economy, and the worldview were built around. It functioned as a totalizing system that explained existence, justified authority, regulated behavior, and managed uncertainty in a hostile natural environment. Unlike later religions that emphasized belief or doctrine, Egyptian religion was fundamentally operational. Its central concern was not salvation through faith, but the preservation of cosmic and social stability through correct action. The universe was assumed to be inherently unstable, constantly threatened by chaos, decay, and reversal, and religion existed to prevent that collapse. Every ritual, temple, prayer, and royal decree was part of a continuous effort to keep reality functioning as intended. At a conceptual core of this system stood math, a principle encompassing order, battle, truth, justice, and proper alignment. Math was not merely a moral abstraction, but the very condition of existence. If math failed, the sun would not rise, the Nile would not flood correctly, society would fracture, and the dead would not reach the afterlife. Opposed to math was Isfet, the ever-present force of disorder, violence, falsehood, and entropy. Egyptian religion didn't imagine a final victory of order over chaos. Instead, it assumed perpetual struggle. Order had to be renewed daily, ritually, and politically. This assumption produced a conservative, maintenance-oriented civilization that valued continuity over innovation and ritual precision over speculative theology. The gods of Egypt were expression of forces rather than distant creators removed from the world. Nature itself was divine, and divinity was immanent in animals, elements, and celestial bodies as well as in emotions and social functions. The pantheon was vast and internally very complex, not because Egyptians were confused, but because reality itself was understood as multi-layered and overdetermined. A single phenomenon could require multiple divine explanations depending on context. The sun, for example, could be Ra at noon, Khepri at dawn, autumn at dusk, and yet still be linked to Horus, Amun, or Aten, depending on theological emphasis. This multiplicity allowed Egyptian religion to absorb regional traditions, political changes, foreign influence without systematic rupture. Syncretism, syncretism was therefore not theological weakness but structural strength. But by combining deities, Egyptian theology articulated relationships between powers rather than insisting on exclusivity. Amun-Ra represented hidden universal force united with visible sovereign power, an ideal that mirrored the fusion of invisible legitimacy and visible kingship. Ptah's creative speech theology in Memphis coexisted in Heliopolitan solar creation myths and Hermopolitan chaos-based cosmologies without contradiction. Truth was not singular or propositional, it was functional. If a myth worked ritually and symbolically, it was valid. Contradiction was tolerated because theology served practice, not in reverse. Kingship was inseparable from religion. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler who performed religious duties, he embodied the divine principle of kingship itself. Royal authority was considered a cosmic necessity, the human mechanism through which math was enforced on earth. The king was simultaneously human and divine, fallible in body yet sacred in office. Through ritual, temple construction, legal judgment, and offerings, the pharaoh sustained the gods who in return sustained the universe. The circular logic created a closed ideological system in which political obedience became a cosmic obligation and rebellion could be framed as an act of chaos. This fusion of religion and state was materially expressed in temple economies. Temples were not congregational spaces but divine household and administrative centers. Priests didn't preach, they served. They washed, clothed, fed, and entertained the gods, cult statues through precisely regulated rituals. In return, the gods ensured cosmic stability. Temples owned land, employed thousands, stored surplus, and functioned as economic engines. Over time, especially in the New Kingdom, the wealth and institutional power of the priesthood grew immensely. This created latent structural tensions. The same religious logic that justified total royal supremacy and allowed priesthood to calm divine authority independent of the king. The historical development of Egyptian religion closely tracked political conditions. In the early dynastic period and Old Kingdom, royal mortuary ideologically dominated. The afterlife was initially a royal privilege, with the deceased king ascending to the stars and joining the sun god. Monumental pyramids and mortuary temples were not displays of personal vanity but investments in cosmic continuity. The king's successful rebirth guaranteed this world's renewal. During this period, gods exists largely to support kingship, and temples to gods were relatively modest compared to royal funerary complexes. As central authority weakened during the first intermediate period and reasserted itself in the Middle Kingdom, religious emphasis shifted. Osiris rose in prominence as Lord of the Dead, democratizing the afterlife. Ordinary elites, eventually commoners, could hope for posthumous judgment and rebirth. This change reflected social realities. When kingship appeared fragile, salvation could no longer be monopolized by the crowds. Coffin texts extended funerary knowledge beyond royalty and personal pity, and became more visible. Religion adapted to political decentralization by offering individuals greater spiritual agency. The New Kingdom marked the zenith of state religion. Theological sophistication. Amun became the supreme god, and his cult at Thebes accumulated enormous wealth and influence. Theology increasingly emphasized divine will, destiny, moral accountability. Oracles became prominent as tools for decision making, giving priests interpretive authority over divine intent. At the same time, Egypt's expanding empire brought foreign deities into the pantheon, which were integrated rather than rejected. Egyptian religion proved capable of absorbing differences without losing coherence. Akhenaten's Ernest revolution represented the system's most serious internal rupture. By suppressing traditional cults and elevating the Athon as a sole state god, Akhenaten attempted to dismantle the existing religious economy and redirected legitimacy entirely through himself. This was not merely theological reform but a radical power reallocation that undermined priestly institutions. Local cults established afterlife beliefs. Athenism lacked mythic depth and funerary infrastructure as well as emotional resonance for the population. After Akhenaten's death, the traditional system was restored with intensity, but the episode permanently weakened the absolute divinity of kingship and accelerated the rise of popular religion. In the later periods, especially under foreign rule, Egyptian religion increasingly emphasized personal protection, salvation, and magic. Deities like Isis gained universal appeal as compassionate protectors and masters of esoteric knowledge. Animal cults flourished, offering tangible and accessible manifestations of divine presence. Under the Ptolemies and Romans, Egyptian religion entered a pluralistic religious marketplace. Syncretic gods emerged, temples continued to function, and Egyptian cults spread beyond Egypt's borders. Yet the system, dependent on state sponsorship, made it vulnerable. As imperial support waned and Christian institutions gained dominance, temples declined, priesthoods dissolved, and ritual continuity broke. Central to Egyptian religion was its elaborate anthropology of the soul. Humans were composite beings consisting of body, ka, ba, name, shadow, and hurt. Instead was not an end. Death was not an end, but a transition requiring precise management. Mummification preserved the body so spiritual components could reunite. Funerary texts provided instruction, password, and spells to navigate the afterlife's danger. Judgment before Osiris was not symbolical but judicial. Moral behavior had cosmic consequences. The heart, seat of conscience and memory, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Survival after death depended on alignment with order during life. Time itself was understood as cyclical rather than linear. Creation was not confined to the past, but reenacted daily. through the sun's journey. Nightly descent into the duat and rebirth at dawn symbolize a constant restoration of order. Festivals, coronations, jubilees mirrored this logic. Ritual resetting time and authority. Egyptian religion thus offered psychological reassurance in a precarious environment. Floods, droughts, disease, and death were not random, they were disruptions that could be corrected through proper ritual and moral conduct. Magic or Heka was not opposed to religion but intrinsic to it. Heka was a lawful force embedded in creation used by gods and human alike. Words, gestures, images, and substances carried power. Amulets protected, spells healed, curses harmed, but none of these acts were inherently immoral. What mattered was alignment with Math. This pragmatic approach allowed religion to address everyday anxieties directly, making it indispensable at the household level. The decline of ancient Egyptian religion was gradual and structural rather than ideological. It did not collapse because people suddenly stopped believing because the institutions that sustained ritual life were dismantled. When temples closed, priesthoods vanished, and state support ended, and systems could no longer reproduce itself. Christianity didn't simply replace Egyptian religion, it occupied the vacuum left by a collapsed religious economy. Yet Egyptian religious symbols, myths, and concepts endured, influencing Greco-Roman thought, Esoteric traditions, and modern imaginations. In sum, ancient religion was not a civilization scale system designed to manage chaos through ritualized order. It fused cosmology with governance, theology with economics, and myth with daily survival. Its longevity was not accidental, it was engineered through flexibility, redundancy, and institutional depth. It didn't promise transcend from the world but mastery within it. That system explains both its extraordinary endurance and the form of its eventual dissolution.